The United States has hit a record for billion-dollar weather disasters in a year with only 4 months to go. We're going to be discussing that today on The Left Wing. My name is Desmond Price of the Independent Thought Podcast, joined by my co-host, Dr. Erica of Cocktails and Capitalism, and our special guests for today, Jordan and Heather from the 805 Uncensored Podcast. So I'm going to throw this up here on the screen. We have this little clip here from Ground News where they say that the U.S. has set the record for billion-dollar weather disasters in a year. They also have this chart here where they're showing all the different weather disasters that have happened all over the country. This was a great piece of reporting by them, so really appreciate this, as well as this graph here that shows all the different, devastation that's happened year over year as we go back all the way to 1980, and we're seeing the precipitous climb of all the different disasters happening in this country going now to 2023. This piece is from the Associated Press, where they say the deadly firestorm in Hawaii and Hurricane Idalia's watery storm surge helped push the United States to a record for the number of weather disasters that cost $1 billion or more, and there's still 4 months to go. Now, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced on Monday that there have been 23 extreme weather events in America that have cost at least $1 billion through this year through August, which is eclipsing the year-long record total of 22 that was set in 2020. So far, this year's disasters have cost more than $57 billion and have claimed 253 lives. Now, the NOAA's count doesn't yet include Tropical Storm Hilary's damages hitting California and the deep drought that has struck the South and the Midwest, because those costs are still to be totaled. Now, the Adam Smith, who is a climatologist for the NOAA, said, "We are seeing the fingerprints of climate change all over our nation. I would not expect things to slow down anytime soon." So, climate change. We talk about this all the time, whether it is addressing the obviousness of what's happening in this country and around the world, or if we're talking about people like Vivek Ramaswamy who say that it's all a hoax, because that's fun. So I want to just bring this right to our guest first and foremost. This was the topic that, both of you had mentioned to me was, closest to you as far as things you wanted to discuss this week. When we're seeing the devastation from climate change all over the place, what is the first thing that comes to your mind, and what do you think needs to change in order to get some true traction with this climate crisis that we're facing?
I would say the first thing that comes to mind is the interconnectedness, the intersectionality of climate change is, I think, what interests me the most about it, how it's connected to so many other political topics. This is a very near and personal issue to Heather and I. I don't know if your viewers know this or if even you guys know this. Ventura County is the fastest warming county in the lower 48.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
We've actually increased by about 4 to 5 degrees just like in the last 50 years.
Whoa.
There was a graphic I put up on our Instagram account just talking about the temperature change across the United States since Barbie was released in 1959.
Oh.
Which, if you think about it, like in geologic time frame, like in the context of Earth's history, that's a blip in the eye. So whenever you have people that try to gaslight you and say that the climate has always changed, that there's always been kind of natural fluctuations, ebb and flow, etc., it's absolute nonsense. In the context of just like those last few decades. This has been the hottest summer on record. Something that I was thinking about is kind of like that meme that goes around about The Simpsons, where it says one like, "Oh, this is the hottest summer," and then the next character says like, "Oh, this is the coldest summer you'll ever see the rest of your life." It's like, that's so true. But just like from like an anecdotal perspective, growing up in the state of California, I've seen the weather change. I grew up in Northern California. Every single fall, around Halloween, it was always very cold. We always had frequent rainstorms. Now that's fire season. Like everybody in Northern California immediately thinks of in Northern California they're called the Diablo winds for the wildfires. In Southern California they're called the Santa Anas. But it has completely flipped the seasons. Everything is so much more variable with precipitation. Now in the state, we get record downpours all the time, like we saw in the last winter. We don't get these like steady rainstorms, and there's not really much of a shoulder season anymore either. Like you have wildfire season that drops off, and then it seems like you just jump immediately into winter.
Mm.
Mhm.
And then so we get all these mudslides from all the vegetation that was burned off. And just in that short period, I've seen how erratic the climate has become. Um, and Heather and I were kind of talking about this before we like started the recording aspect of this. What's really driving a lot of these flooding events across the United States is the intensity of the rainfall. And so, like in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for example, earlier this year, they received 24 inches of rain in a 12-hour period,
Wow.
which is just an
Wow.
incredible amount of rain.
Wow.
And that's happening all over the country. Where my sister lives in St. Louis last summer, they received 9 inches of rain in like 6 hours.
Jeez.
And so, you have news stories where they're interviewing people that have lived in these places for generations, and they're like, oh, we've never seen anything like this before. Um,
Mhm.
and it's really incredible how intense the climate crisis is getting. And I'll pass it on to Heather because I feel like I did a lot of rambling there.
No. Well, you know, the thing about climate change where we are right now is I feel that we have spent so much time arguing about one, whether or not it's happening,
Okay.
and two,
Yeah.
yeah, and two, why it's happening.
Yeah.
So those are the two arguments that have really dominated the discourse around climate change for decades now. We've
Yeah.
spent so much time doing that we are now in it and we are not prepared. And we do not have the governance um in place to to get to get through it.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned, I think you said 235 people have died this year in the United States alone as a
Yeah.
result of climate, and I fear that that's only going to escalate, and we do not have policy measures in place to stop that. You know, we don't have federal heat regulations. We have a lot of states that have absolutely no heat protections for workers. When we get back to COVID and pandemic diseases, we don't have a lot of workplace OSHA regulations that
Mhm.
protect workers from getting ill with, you know, the next big catastrophic disease, or even COVID, which is still a problem for, especially for workers. COVID is an occupational disease now. We don't have any types of stopgaps in place because we've spent so much time arguing. And so I think that when you hear like Joe Biden and other, you know, politicians go on and say that this is an existential threat, I think that that's true, but I think that they have been a part of what has made it existential.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just participated in a working group that kind of like analyzed what's it called, the Inflation Reduction Act,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and its actual impacts on climate. And so much of it at this point is really actually theoretical. Like the EVs, they have evidence of that, but like the investments in climate infrastructure, there hasn't even really been that much uptake of that. Less than a third of the money that they've allocated for that has even been requested. So I'm scared. I'm honestly scared. I'm scared for myself. I'm scared for my family. I'm scared for my kids because we don't have policies and protections in place. And I see that as a failure of government, of governance, and honestly, like, you know, we could get into a much different conversation about social contract, but it's a failure. We have had a total failure because we spent all our time arguing.
Yeah.
And that's where we are.
Well,
I don't know. I don't
also,
know.
like, what about just like from an infrastructure perspective? Like, a lot of the reason that we have, besides the direct climate change problem, that we have the compounding infrastructure issues and these billion-dollar disasters piling up is because we haven't updated our infrastructure in accordance to the changing climate.
Mhm.
And it's just going to
Mhm.
keep on getting worse because we've already fallen so far behind. Like, you know, Florida, for example, I don't even know what we do with Florida. I mean, almost the entire state is at sea level. All the major cities are surrounded by bodies of water.
Yeah.
It's effectively a rainforest that's been clear cut, replaced with strip malls and suburbs.
Mhm. I wanted to respond to what Heather was saying about we've spent so much time arguing. I think it's really important to point out that is these arguments are astroturfed. These arguments are manufactured by the oil and gas companies.
Yeah.
Exxon knew in the 70s exactly what they were doing in terms of climate change. They paid scientists to study this shit, and they knew, and then they buried the results of their research so that, and not only buried the results of their research, but paid scientists to go out and say, like, do propaganda for the fossil fuel industry where they would cast doubt on the science about climate change, where they would say, well, there's all this uncertainty there, I mean, and there's all the cyclicality and how the climate works and everything. So we can just, if we cast enough doubt on that, people will be so bogged down with the arguments about whether or not it's happening and whether or not it's man-made and whether or not it's human caused, anthropogenic, that we won't ever get around to stopping the fossil fuel industry from raping and pillaging the planet and destroying future life for future generations on this planet. Like, this is manufactured confusion and argumentation that then the people on the right just swallowed up those talking points about confusion about climate change, and they're just regurgitating fossil fuel propaganda. We need to be showing people how they have become fools for the fossil fuel company, for the fossil fuel industry. They have just become completely blindsided by them, and if they start realizing that they've been duped, like, that is a little bit of my hope there for the future, is that people start realizing these people, this is a conspiracy to make me not believe in the thing that is going to kill me.
I mean, even recycling is manufactured propaganda from the oil and
Yeah.
gas industry
Yeah.
to save the plastic industry.
Totally.
Well, I think you also have to look at, you know, politics and the way that elections, this gets back to the issue of election reform and the way that elections have impacted this. Because even at the local level, you have people that are they're just placed in a seat, and then they just do what they're told, right? So we talked about a politician in our county who, she's taken $1 million of money from oil and gas industry. Okay. And so recently we did, just this last week, the oil companies have been suing our county about language in our general plan relative to venting, which directly impacts when the oil rig is vented, right? That's part of why our county, as Jordan mentioned, our county is the fastest forming county in the 48 states of the contiguous United States. But the oil and gas industry has so much of a chokehold around these politicians, and it doesn't matter if they're to the right or to the left.
Yeah.
They have so much of a chokehold, and they are so afraid of being sued that they just make the language in the general planning and the policy so weak. So this week they amended our language in our general plan for our whole county, to say that the companies will only have to vent, appropriately if it's feasible. And they get to decide whether or not it's feasible. And that to me is again a failure of government. It's a failure of good governance. It is a failure of leadership. We don't have leaders. We just have people that are kowtowing to as you just said, the gas and oil industry, to their propaganda, And to the money that they've put into politics. And now if they can't buy you, they sue you.
Yeah.
And that's happening on the right and the left, because let me tell you, in that case with the venting here in Ventura County, a Democrat is the chair of the county board, and he voted to change the language too, because he's afraid of being sued.
Wow.
Even though the insurance commissioner for the state of California said that our general plan is constitutionally sound. So you could sue us, right? And who cares?
Yeah.
They're so afraid. They're cowards.
Yeah. And, to your point about the fossil fuels industry's chokehold on politicians, the Inflation Reduction Act was originally going to be a very extensive, expansive act that was going to do a lot for the climate. And I think people keep forgetting this, that like the original plan was actually really, really fucking huge.
Good. Yeah.
And then because of fucking Joe Manchin and other like people that were just there to spoil, like who are completely propped up by fossil fuel money and coal money and things, like these people ruined our chances of having this incredibly huge the most environmental bill in history. I mean, it still was, but it was pathetic compared to what it was originally going to be before Manchin, decide that he was not going to let it pass, and Cinema as well. And yeah, these people with the fucking fossil fuel money in their pockets.
What was it? Upton Sinclair. He was like, never expect a man to understand something when his salary is dependent on him not understanding it.
Such a good quote, man. We should post that online.
That, or the fear. We had a county supervisor, because Ventura County is a oil and gas county. We are an oil county. We had a supervisor who sadly died last year, in a car, not related. She got hit by a car, and when she made donations, though, to this is so sad. When she made donations to anti-oil candidates, she used her middle name, because that's all public information.
Oh, geez.
And it's like, you're so afraid that they're going to come after you. There's so many politicians around here that are afraid of the oil and gas. I don't know why. I mean, I guess like Jordan just said, you may not get elected again. They might find somebody better to come up after you. But I don't know. I do agree with the comment that it's existential, and I agree with you also about the inflation reduction. That could have been a really, really great bill.
So the thing that we talk about this all the time, Heather, it's absolutely insane that the city that we live in, Oxnard, has 3 power plants that are
Yeah.
directly on the beach.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we just happen to live in a city that's 80% Black, brown, and indigenous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no other city in Ventura County that has anything even remotely comparable to that.